Is the UK falling apart? It might sound dramatic, but look around. Record high inflation, a collapsing NHS, political chaos, and even the possibility of the country breaking apart. Things have never looked this uncertain. Is this the beginning of the end for the United Kingdom? Let's talk about the facts. Over 14 million people in the UK are now living in poverty. The cost of living has skyrocketed. Home ownership feels impossible, and public services are on the verge of collapse. Meanwhile, Scotland is pushing for independence, tensions in Northern Ireland are rising, and the UK's global influence is fading fast. The country that once ruled a quarter of the world is now struggling to hold itself together. And here's the real question: can the UK survive this crisis, or are we witnessing its slow downfall? Some experts believe the country is heading for economic decline, political collapse, and even territorial breakup. Others argue that with the right leadership, it can turn things around. But what's really happening? And what does it mean for the future of the UK? In this video, we'll break down 10 major threats that could change Britain forever. Stay with us until the end, because the final reason might be the most shocking of them all. Let's dive in. Number 1. Economic decline and cost of living crisis. The UK's economy isn't just struggling, it's spiralling, and millions are feeling the impact. Prices are climbing faster than wages. Businesses are shutting down, and people who once lived comfortably are now barely making ends meet. This isn't just another financial downturn. This is a crisis that's reshaping everyday life. Look at food prices. A grocery trip that used to cost £50 now sets you back £80 or more. Essentials like milk, bread, and vegetables are suddenly luxuries for many families. And it's not just food. Rents are skyrocketing. Mortgage rates have shot through the roof, and energy bills. Some households are paying double what they used to. People are being forced to make impossible choices, heat their homes, or put food on the table. Now let's talk about wages, or the lack of them keeping up. While the cost of living is exploding, salaries aren't moving. Millions of workers, from nurses to teachers to railway staff, have walked out in protest, demanding pay that actually reflects the reality of living in Britain today. And the job market? Uncertainty is everywhere. Companies are downsizing, layoffs are rising, and finding secure, well-paying work is getting harder by the day. This isn't just a rough patch. It's a fundamental shift in the UK's economy. If something doesn't change, the gap between the rich and the struggling will grow even wider. More businesses will collapse, unemployment will climb, and people will continue to lose faith in the system. So, the real question is there a way back from this, or is the UK headed for long-term economic decline? Number 2. Brexit fallout and trade issues. When the UK left the EU, it was supposed to be about taking back control, boosting the economy, and creating new opportunities. But fast forward a few years, and the reality looks very different. Businesses are drowning in red tape, trade has become a logistical nightmare, and the UK's global influence is shrinking. So, what went wrong? For starters, trade with Europe, our biggest market, has become way more complicated and expensive. Before Brexit, UK businesses could sell to EU countries freely, without extra checks or paperwork. Now, endless customs forms, border delays, and rising costs are making it harder for companies to operate. Small businesses, in particular, are struggling to survive. Some have stopped trading with Europe altogether because it's simply not worth the hassle. And it's not just businesses feeling the pain. Consumers are too. Prices have gone up because it now costs more to import goods. Fresh food, electronics, and even basic household items have become more expensive and harder to get. And let's not forget the shortages. Empty supermarket shelves, supply chain issues, and rising delivery costs have all become part of post-Brexit Britain. Then there's the bigger picture, the UK's global standing. Once a major player in European decision-making, The country is now trying to rebuild trade deals from scratch. Some new agreements have been made, but they don't come close to replacing the benefits of being in the EU. Meanwhile, industries like fishing, farming, and manufacturing, once promised a brighter future, are feeling betrayed and abandoned. So the big question is, was Brexit worth it? Or has the UK made a mistake it can't afford to fix? Number 3. Political instability and leadership failures. The UK has always had political ups and downs, but in recent years, it's been absolute chaos. Multiple prime ministers in just a few years, endless scandals, party infighting, and a government that seems completely disconnected from the struggles of ordinary people. If leadership is supposed to bring stability, then Britain is in serious trouble. Think about it. How many prime ministers have we had since 2016? David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, who barely lasted 7 weeks, and now Rishi Sunak. That's 5 leaders in less than a decade, each one promising to fix the mess left by the last. But instead of solutions, we've seen broken promises, economic disasters, and constant uncertainty. And it's not just about leadership changes. The government itself seems to be in constant crisis mode. Scandals, corruption, and reckless policies have eroded public trust in a way we've never seen before. From the Partygate scandal to questionable financial decisions that sent the markets crashing, the political system feels more like a circus than a functioning government. The problem is, while politicians fight among themselves, real issues are being ignored. The NHS is collapsing, public services are underfunded, the cost of living is crushing families, yet all we see is more political drama. People are losing faith in the system, and for good reason. When leadership is this unstable, how can the country move forward? So the big question is, does the UK have the leadership it needs to fix these crises? Or is the political system too broken to recover? Number 4. Scotland's independence movement. For years, Scotland's push for independence has been growing, but now it feels closer than ever. More and more people in Scotland are questioning whether staying in the UK is really in their best interest. And after Brexit, leadership failures, and economic struggles, the argument for independence is stronger than ever. Could the UK be on the verge of breaking apart? Back in 2014, Scotland held a referendum on leaving the UK. At the time, 55% voted to stay, but things have changed dramatically since then. One of the biggest reasons? Brexit. Scotland overwhelmingly voted to remain in the EU, but despite that, it was forced to leave along with the rest of the UK. Many Scots feel that their voices were ignored, and ever since, the demand for a new referendum has only gotten louder. Then there's the issue of leadership. Many in Scotland feel that Westminster doesn't represent them and that UK policies, especially on the economy, immigration and healthcare, are making things worse, not better. The Scottish Government, led by the Scottish National Party, SNP, argues that an independent Scotland could rejoin the EU, take control of its economy, and make decisions that actually reflect the will of the Scottish people. But independence wouldn't be easy. There are huge questions about Scotland's economy, its currency, and how it would separate from the rest of the UK. And let's not forget, Westminster is determined to block another referendum. So the big question remains, will Scotland finally break away, or will the UK hold together despite the growing divide? One thing is certain, the fight for independence isn't going away anytime soon. Number 5. Northern Ireland tensions. Northern Ireland has always had a complex and fragile history, but in recent years, tensions have been escalating once again. Brexit, political disputes, and old divisions are resurfacing, raising serious questions about Northern Ireland's future and whether it will even remain part of the UK. One of the biggest flashpoints? The Northern Ireland Protocol. When Brexit happened, the UK had to find a way to avoid creating a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The solution was the protocol. keeping Northern Ireland aligned with some EU trade rules to prevent a land border. But that created a new problem: a trade barrier between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Businesses have struggled, unionist parties are furious, and many feel that Northern Ireland has been treated differently from the rest of the UK. And then there's the Good Friday Agreement, the peace deal that ended decades of violence known as the Troubles. The agreement was based on a delicate balance, but Brexit has disrupted that balance. Political parties in Northern Ireland are deeply divided, and the government has struggled to function properly for years. Some fear that rising tensions could lead to unrest, or even a push for Irish reunification. Support for a united Ireland is slowly growing, with younger generations seeing it as a real possibility. If a referendum on reunification were to happen, the result could change the shape of the UK forever. So the big question is, can Northern Ireland's tensions be resolved? Or are we looking at the beginning of another major political crisis? Number 6. Declining public services. Public services in the UK are falling apart, and millions of people are feeling the impact. The NHS is at breaking point, public transport is unreliable and overpriced, and schools are desperately underfunded. For decades, these services were a source of pride, but now, they're struggling to function. How did it get this bad? Let's start with the NHS. Waiting times have never been worse. People are stuck in A and E for hours. Routine surgeries are delayed for months. And getting a GP appointment feels like winning the lottery. The staff are exhausted, underpaid, and leaving in record numbers. While the government keeps promising more funding, it never seems to be enough. And with an ageing population and increasing demand, the NHS crisis is only getting worse. Then there's public transport. Trains are constantly delayed or cancelled. Ticket prices keep going up. And in many areas, bus services have been completely cut. People are paying more money for a worse service. And for those in rural areas, getting around is becoming nearly impossible. Education isn't in great shape either. School budgets are stretched thin. Teachers are quitting due to stress. And many schools can't even afford basic resources. Class sizes are growing, making it harder for students to get the attention they need. Meanwhile, universities are raising tuition fees while cutting staff and courses. The result? A generation of young people struggling with debt and uncertain job prospects. Public services are the backbone of a functioning society, but in the UK, they're collapsing in real time. If things don't change, the gap between those who can afford private alternatives and those who rely on crumbling services will only get bigger. The question is, how much worse will it get before real action is taken? Number 7. Housing crisis and rising homelessness. Owning a home in the UK used to be an achievable dream. Now for many, it feels completely out of reach. House prices have soared to insane levels. Rent is eating up most of people's paychecks, and homelessness is rising at an alarming rate. The housing crisis isn't just a problem, it's a national emergency. For first-time buyers, the situation is brutal. The average house price has skyrocketed, while wages have barely moved. Even those who save for years still struggle to afford a deposit. And if they do manage to buy, soaring mortgage rates mean they're locked into huge monthly payments. Many are now wondering, is home ownership even realistic anymore? For renters, things aren't much better. Rent prices have exploded, and in some areas, people are paying nearly half their salary just to keep a roof over their heads. Landlords are increasing rents, evictions are rising, and competition for rental properties is fiercer than ever. People are forced to accept terrible conditions just to have a place to live. But the worst part? Homelessness is rising fast. More and more people are being pushed onto the streets, not just because of job losses, but because even those with jobs can't afford rent. Families are crammed into temporary housing, unsure of what their future holds. Food banks and shelters are overwhelmed, trying to help those who have been completely left behind. This isn't just an issue of high prices, it's a broken system. Without serious action, the housing crisis will only widen the gap between the wealthy and those who are struggling to survive. So the real question is, how did we let it get this bad? And is there any way to fix it? Number 8. Aging population and workforce shortages. The UK is getting older, and that's creating a huge problem, not just for the economy, but for healthcare, pensions, and even the job market. More people are retiring than entering the workforce, and there simply aren't enough young workers to fill the gaps. If this trend continues, who's going to keep the country running? Right now, the UK has one of the fastest aging populations in Europe. Life expectancy has increased, which is great, but at the same time, birth rates have dropped. That means fewer young people to support an ever-growing number of retirees. And with pensions, healthcare, and social care costs rising, the pressure on public services is becoming unsustainable. The big question is who's going to pay for it all? Then there's the workforce crisis. Key industries like healthcare, construction, and agriculture are desperate for workers. The NHS is already struggling with staff shortages, and without enough doctors, nurses, and carers, the system is buckling under the pressure. Meanwhile, businesses are finding it harder to hire, which slows down the economy and pushes up costs for everyone. Brexit has made things even worse. With fewer migrant workers, industries that relied on European labour, like farming and hospitality, are facing serious staffing shortages. And with fewer young people entering the workforce, companies are being forced to cut back or shut down entirely. This isn't just a short-term issue, it's a ticking time bomb. Without more workers, the economy will stall, services will collapse, and the burden on the younger generation will become unbearable. So, the real question is, how does the UK fix this before it's too late? Number 9. Climate change and environmental challenges. The UK is already feeling the effects of climate change, and it's only getting worse. Floods, heat waves, rising sea levels, and extreme weather events are becoming more common, putting homes, businesses, and even lives at risk. But here's the real problem. The country isn't prepared to deal with it. Look at the weather patterns. The UK used to have mild summers and rainy winters. But now, record-breaking heat waves are making cities unbearable, and heavy rainfall is flooding entire towns. In coastal areas, erosion is swallowing up land, and homes that once seemed safe are now on the verge of collapsing into the sea. Insurance costs are rising, and some areas might become completely uninhabitable in the future. Then there's the energy crisis. The UK has made some progress in renewable energy, but it's not enough. Fossil fuels still dominate, and as global energy markets become more unstable, prices will continue to skyrocket. The push for net zero emissions sounds great in theory, but without real action, it's just an empty promise. And let's not forget pollution. The air in major cities is becoming dangerously toxic, leading to serious health problems, especially for children and the elderly. Rivers are being polluted by untreated sewage, and plastic waste is piling up faster than it can be managed. The truth is, climate change isn't some distant future problem. It's happening right now. If the UK doesn't step up and take real action, the damage could be irreversible. So the real question is, can the country adapt in time, or is it already too late? Number 10. Declining global influence. The UK was once a global powerhouse, shaping world politics, trade, and diplomacy. But today, its influence is fading fast. Once seen as a leader on the world stage, Britain is now struggling to keep up, losing its voice in international affairs and watching other nations take its place. The big question is, how did it come to this? Brexit was a turning point. Leaving the EU meant walking away from one of the most powerful economic and political alliances in the world. Suddenly, the UK was no longer at the table where major decisions were made, and instead of leading discussions, it was trying to rebuild relationships from the outside. Trade deals have been harder to negotiate, and global influence has shrunk as a result. Then there's the economic downturn. A weak economy means less power on the global stage. Countries with booming economies, like China, the US, and even some EU nations, are setting the agenda, while the UK is struggling with inflation, trade barriers, and a shrinking GDP. Once a dominant force in global finance, Britain now faces stiff competition from emerging markets. Diplomatically, the UK is finding itself less relevant. While it still holds a seat at the UN Security Council and has historic ties with many countries, its ability to influence global decisions is waning. Even old alliances, like the special relationship with the US, don't seem as strong as they once were. The reality is, the world is moving forward, and the UK is at risk of being left behind. So the real question is, can Britain reclaim its influence, or is its era as a global leader officially over? The UK is standing at a crossroads, and the choices made in the coming years could determine its fate. From a collapsing economy to political chaos, from a broken healthcare system to the growing threat of the UK itself breaking apart, the challenges are bigger than ever. But the question remains, is this the beginning of the end, or can Britain turn things around? Some believe that strong leadership, economic reform, and strategic global alliances could help rebuild the UK's strength. Others fear that the damage has already been done, and that decline is inevitable. One thing is certain, things cannot continue as they are. The cracks are widening, and unless real action is taken, the UK could face an irreversible collapse. But what do you think? Is there still hope, or is the UK heading toward disaster? Let us know in the comments. Your opinion matters. We put a huge amount of time and effort into making these videos. So if you found this one insightful, drop a comment, hit that like button, and most importantly, subscribe. It's just one click for you, but it means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.